Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
One or two of you have been here for an hour, haven't you? Yeah, good afternoon, how are you doing? So I'm Stuart from Strathearn Distillery, and I'm about to give a talk which is slightly nerve-wracking on World Gin Day. I'm going to prove to you that all Scotch whisky comes from gin. Who was the person that said put your hand up when you told the joke? That wasn't a joke. So, I'll tell you a little bit about Strathearn first, but because you're going to have to sit and listen to me for a little while, I thought I'd best get you on my side with a little gin and tonic. So, Strathearn Distillery is a whisky distillery. Ooh, I hear you all think in your head. But we make gin, okay? Yay! This is my gin. This is my whiskey. Ooh, crowd's already intrigued. Fantastic. So, what you have in front of you is our Heather Rose gin. The reason it has the colour in it is a glorious accident. So, may I introduce Delilah? Delilah is our 50-litre still. Now, Delilah is used to make some of my gin and also for experiment. Very fortunate today that half the workforce are here. So if I can introduce Zach. Zach is my distiller. Scottish Young Distiller of the Year, 22 years old. And he produces great spirit on Delilah, Bella, Erin and Samson. Yeah, you got the joke? So we have 4 stills in total to be a whisky distillery. Bella, 1,000 litres. Erin, 500 litres. The 500 litre still makes us the smallest Scotch whisky still in Scotland. So there'll be other people say they're the smallest. Might not be true. We are the smallest currently in Scotland. But then we have a 100 litre still and a 50 litre still. All handmade over in Portugal by a little chap called Armindo. They start off as a copper pipe like this, 2 hammers and a hollowed out log. And what Armindo does is he puts them down on the hollowed out log, hits them with 1 hammer till it gets soft, and then the other hammer to begin to shape the still to make this gorgeous, slightly rotund, I like to think, shape. And after 3 or 4 hours, he puts it to one side and lets the stresses come out of the still, and then goes back 4 or 5 days later and continues until he makes these wonderfully handcrafted stills. So, we make gin in the still as well as whisky. The gin you've got in front of you just now, because I won't keep you in suspense, is Heather Rose. Most people put botanicals inside the still, bubble it up, out comes a clear spirit that you and I would all recognise as gin. We can't do that because we're a whisky distillery. So instead of putting the botanicals in the still, I have a little basket that sits here, and we put the botanicals in there. You have vapour infusion. So hot spirit, hot vapour comes out of the still, through the botanicals, stripping off all the essential oils, giving you a clear spirit known as gin. But we wanted to use heather flowers and rose petals. They don't like being in the basket when it's hot and high pressure. So we tried that the first time, not so good. So the second time we made gin without heather and rose and added it afterwards, a process called cold compounding, where you take a muslin bag, put these extra botanicals in and dip them into the spirit, and you leave it for up to 7 to 10 days. And you get colour, hence the reason Heather Rose has this lovely deep colour. Now, concerning gin drinkers like yourself, get slightly freaked out when you see colourful gins like this. Why is that? Has it been in a barrel? How have you got the colour in it? All natural colour. We were going to filter it out with charcoal, so it was clear and no one would get worried. And then the magic happened. So, in front of you, you have a champagne flute of Heather Rose. Looks a little bit like a whiskey, which is why I'm doing the talk. And some Mediterranean Fever Tree. I'm going to pour this into here. I would like everyone in the audience to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then, sir, if you could shout abracadabra. Hopefully, this goes well. If not, I'll juggle. Okay? So, ready? Go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Pink champagne. So, you can try it for yourselves. What happens is the rose petal reacts with the acidity of the tonic, and you get a beautiful pink blush gin and tonic. Perfect serve in a champagne flute, no garnish, no gimmick, just gin and tonic. It's a celebration of gin. Cheers. Happy World Gin Day. Good start, isn't it? It's a winner, good. Okay, upstairs is a shop. They have lots of it. Feel free to buy. So, I thought I'd give you this as I waffle on about how all gin or all whiskey comes from gin. So, how many people here have been to gin tastings before? Excellent. For you guys, I apologise. I'm not into tweed, beards, or bow ties. So, I'm afraid it's just all me. Slightly more casual at Strathearn. Strathearn Distillery, smallest whiskey distillery in Scotland. The whole distillery, twice the size of this room. Myself, Zach, Liam, who's 22, Kenny, who's upstairs, ruins the age average slightly. He's our manager without portfolio. You know, he lifts heavy things, he tightens up things too tight, he moves heavy things, does a great job. And then there's Tony. Tony started the distillery. Excuse me. We're 3 years old. We make gin to keep the bank manager happy. Anytime you want. We can go with the first one? Yeah. So we just were so lucky that we hit gin to the market as the Scottish gin boom started. It's been going on sort of 3 years. And now we have a core range of 4 gins on the market. But as you can see, probably from our stills, if you've ever been to a distillery before, they look slightly different. They're slightly more Arabic in look. The Moors started distilling back in the 1100s, and it was probably more this style of still. We chose to go for this sort of still from Armindo because it allows us to make more than gin. We can make whiskey, we can make gin. As announced in the papers yesterday, we've done the world's first ever Scottish Calvados, Scottish cider brandy. Gets released on the 21st of June. So we took Thistley Cross apple cider, distilled it, then aged it in American oak and French oak casks, and it gets released. Very small release, very small batch. So we were actually sort of the home of handcrafted Scottish spirits, not just whiskey, gin. We've done that. You're also going to try today a world first. Hasn't even been announced yet, so you'll be the first people ever to try it. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing the talk, is to take you back on this retrospective of Scotch whiskey. So, what you have in front of you is whiskey. Boo, hiss. I know. What is coming? I know, all you gin lovers here, and I'm giving you whiskey. I did this talk in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society 2 months ago. You can imagine how well that went. But I got out alive. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start you with whiskey. And I'm going to take you backwards through time to prove to you that all whiskey comes from gin. So this whiskey is made down the road from Strathearn. Strathearn is just outside Perth, between Perth and Crieff, a little village called Methven. 780 acre farm, and we're on the farm there. So a traditional farm distillery. I make approximately 16,000 litres of whiskey a year, which sounds a lot. Has anyone seen a whiskey tanker, Chivas Regal or Glenmorangie, going up and down the motorway? Looks like a fuel tanker. They hold about 28,000 litres. So quick maths, about 18 years of Zach's life, 18 months of Zach's life making whiskey to fill one of those tankers. What you have in front of you here to start you off with is Tullibardine Sovereign. Now, Scotland is running out of old whiskey. Okay? We've been really successful. We've sold lots of whiskey. So the old whiskey is disappearing. The stocks are low. Is there any whiskey drinkers? Excellent! This is going better than I thought. Any gin drinkers? Because the rest of the day is going to be quite ginish. Okay, so I'm going to ask a silly question possibly. What does single malt whiskey mean?
It's being a distillery by a single malt and specific place generally expected to, they'll sell some single malt, some to blend.
Yeah, excellent. Single malt, all it means is made in one distillery. Okay? Doesn't mean one cask, it means one distillery. So when you make, if you got a classic Macallan 10-year-old whiskey, it wasn't just 10-year-old Macallan that was in that. They would take maybe 500 casks of 10-year-old and they would add some 16-year-old, some 20-year-old, some 25-year-old. I don't know the blend, but they would add older whiskey. So they get a lovely flavour profile which is consistent around the world. Macallan 10-year-old is consistency. Yeah? But as we run out of older whiskey, you'll notice the age statements on bottles begin to disappear. So you hear about Macallan Gold now, not 10-year-old. Because when you take the age statement off, the age statement is the youngest whiskey in the bottle. So it's all from one distillery, but it's the youngest whiskey in the bottle. So now people are calling them names. This is Tullibardine Sovereign that you're drinking. Now, I've had a chat to Zach, we've had a wee think. We know the guys at Tullibardine very well, it's a lovely whiskey. Put in context, they're a small distillery. How many litres do you think they make a year? 100,000, excellent guess. Nowhere near the answer. Any advance? Zach, if you get this right, I'll be gonna... How many, Zach? To the nearest litre?
About 2.7 million.
You're close, you're still 500,000 out. 3.1 million litres at Tullibardine. Small Scottish malt whisky distillery. 16,000. Tiny Scotch whisky distillery. So our distillery is all about quality, not quantity. So Zach goes in every day, distills with our stills. It's all about flavour and the best possible spirit we can put in the cask. Bigger guys are doing great things, but they're making much bigger volumes. So when you hear of small batch from small distilleries, just think, how small is small batch? 3.1 million litres, 16,000 litres. So this is Sovereign. It's been aged in bourbon cask. So it's quite a creamy malt. I think it's going to be very easy for you to drink. Maybe try it neat, then with maybe a splash of water. It'll begin to open up a little bit. But the interesting thing about this is it doesn't have an age statement. We don't know how old it is. Now, I'm going to guess probably around 8-year-old. Yeah, it's got a decent amount of age. They age it normally in big casks, 250 litre casks, hogsheads. So, they're a fair size. At Strathern, we're a brand new whisky distillery. We don't have that time, that luxury. So we're very traditional. We use traditional stills and we use very traditional casks. So we use 50 litre and 100 litre casks. And what happens is you get much more surface area in contact with the spirit, so it ages quicker. So our 3-year-old whisky, Scotch whisky, has to be 3 years and 1 day in an oak cask in Scotland to be called Scotch. Our 50 litre cask will age about 3 times quicker than a 250 litre. So this is maybe 8-year-old. Our 3-year-old should taste like this, if not better. So it's been aged quicker in a smaller cask. However, why does Scotch whisky have to be in a cask for 3 years and a day? Anyone know? Round about 1911, there was a law passed saying now it has to be in a cask for 3 years and a day because it was the start of prohibition in the UK. America had started or about to start prohibition, so they wanted to get on side, get the Americans into the First World War. They were, oh yeah, we'll do the same, we'll cut down whisky production by saying it's got to be 3 years. And then at the end of the war, they forgot to repeal the law, so it stuck. So now all Scotch whisky is 3 years and a day. Other places around the world, the rules are very different to be called whiskey. Not Scotch, but called whiskey. So you can go to Japan, what is it, 5-6 minutes?
Yeah, if that.
Yeah? Just has to see the oak and then move on, and you can call it whiskey. So, we're going to move on to how do people find that whiskey? The whiskey drinkers?
Very nice.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Non-whiskey drinkers? No. I'm going to go and chat the door and get you something special out next time. So, at Strathern, what we like to do is we pride ourselves, because this stuff isn't going to be in the cask for very long, we pride ourselves on the quality of the spirit we're putting in the cask. So, when we make our whiskey, we have a half-ton mash tun where we add water, malted barley, mash in, leave it for about 90 minutes, sparge it and take off what we call wort, which is the start of whiskey. We put it into a fermenter, we add yeast, and we make a distiller's beer. Now, most distilleries, the big guys, will ferment for about 60 hours. We ferment for between 5 and 6 days, much slower, cooler temperature, to give you hopefully sweeter spirit. We're going to get more esters coming through. So when we then go to distill it, you're going to get a sweeter spirit, and hopefully a more palatable spirit, the best possible new make spirit. So this next drink you're getting is Strathern Silver Spirit. New make, straight from the still. This is whiskey before you put it into a cask. Okay? So all whiskey, before you put it into the cask, looks like this. It's the cask that gives it the flavour, extra flavour, and the colour. A lot of distilleries you will visit won't let you try their cleric or their new make. They're not ashamed of it, but it's just not a representation of the whiskey you're expecting to be tasting. We sell our new make because we're so proud of it. We want it to be the best possible spirit that we can make because it's not going to be in the cask for very long. So what you're going to get now is, this is 50% alcohol. We do good tastings at Strathern, so everything now is going to be the high end of 50. Okay, this is now the weakest drink you're going to have. We started off at 40, moved to 47, now on to 50. By the end of it, we'll all be friends, we'll be high-fiving on the way out. You'll loosen up a bit, it'll be a great day. So this is Strathern Silver Spirit, unpeated. This is what whiskey is before it goes in the cask. So there's a sweetness there, there's a maltiness, but it's quite palatable, easy drinking. Great base for cocktails. A little splash of water will release a bit more of the aroma, and you'll get the sweetness coming through as well. For those of you that are finding that slightly tricky, there's always Heather Rose gin in the champagne flute. Just keep going. So that's a step back. That's malted spirit, or malted beer that's been distilled. Because whiskey comes from distilled beer. Yeah? The trouble with distilled beer in Scotland is that if you go back several hundred years, we don't have hops. Hops is used to preserve the beer, make it last longer, as flavour as well, but it's there as a preservative. So up the west coast of Scotland 400 years ago, they didn't have hops. They used to use juniper as a preservative. So they were making a juniper beer. So if you distill a juniper beer, what you're actually making is Geneva, however you wish to say it. So that's where gin starts. If you go back to 1575, give or take, Ball's Distillery starts in Amsterdam, and they're making... welcome, go. Come in, go. So it starts there, 1585, give or take, quick history lesson, and world's best gin fact. Queen Elizabeth I sent troops over to start fighting in the 80-Year War against Philip of Spain. These troops used to come back from this war talking, waxing lyrical about these fantastically courageous Dutch troops. They would charge out into battle. Wah! Let's just fight. The most courageous people they'd ever come across. What they don't tell you is that every morning, as part of their rations, they were given 2 or 3 tots of Genever. The expression Dutch courage comes from there. So those couple of drinks that you have before you go into battle, stand up and talk in front of people, meet the in-laws, it all comes from 1585 when we were in battle with the Dutch against the Spanish. So, what you have here now is Strathearn Genever. This is our malt spirit, which has been distilled through juniper. So when I'm making the gin, I've got the basket here with juniper. So instead of putting grain neutral spirit in here, which is ethanol at 98%, which we make about 48% and has no flavour, we actually put our whiskey base in here and distill it. So you're going to get those malty notes of whiskey, and then in the background though, you've still got that juniper note coming through. So this is where whiskey and gin coexist. Oops! It's okay. We'll get you a towel. This is, it's not a mashup. We're going to get a bigger mashup in a minute. So this is malted spirit, malted spirit which is distilled through juniper to give you Genever. Again, great in cocktails and a nice different drink. What do people think of that as a drink? You getting the whiskey notes?
Yeah.
Getting the juniper? Yeah? Just still that ginniness coming through? What? Okay. Well, again, now we're trying to think back. In Scotland, we didn't do spirit like this to start with. Because up the west coast of Scotland 300-400 years ago, these guys would have dried out their malted barley or fired their stills with peat. So probably the first ever whiskies made up the west coast of Scotland would have been peated. And still in the islands now, they're known for their peated whiskies. So we have to go another step. So the next spirit that's about to come charging out, fingers crossed, is Strathearn Black Spirit, our peated new make, straight from the still. Now, we have 16 different products now in our portfolio of craft spirits, ranging from gin to the world's first Scottish Calvados. And if you were to ask Zach what his favourite spirit was, it would be a really difficult decision. If you were to ask me my favourite spirit, it's like picking your favourite child. It would be the next one that's going to come through the door. We all think that the peaty spirit we make is fantastic. So, really proud of it, and we're currently doing a batch of peaty spirit just now. It's one of these things that's quite hard to get hold of, small amounts of good peated malt. So we only make a very small amount of it at the distillery. So we've had the last 4 months of making this peaty spirit, which is fantastic. Obviously my loud peaty chat didn't work, so I'll just go down. So, this is, who the whiskey drinkers, what sort of peated whiskey do you like? How peaty? Lagavulin, fairly peaty. Kalila, okay. Well, this one you're going to try is about 28 to 30 parts per million. So, Talisker-esque?
Yeah.
So, Talisker likers, this is the sort of level. What you're going to get with this particular spirit, it will have a little bit of smokiness on the nose. It will have a nice sweetness and maltiness. But the finish is when you're going to get that peat coming through. So this is Scotch whisky, unaged, straight from the still again, at 50%.
Like a Glenlivet style.
Well, no one's perfect. Something a little bit different here for you. Don't know how many people have tried new make peated malt. New make, okay. Well, this is unusual, but I think it sits well because you can sit and sip this. This is actually a nice little dram to have. If you can imagine, did the guys up the west coast of Scotland 300-400 years ago wait 3 years in a day? No. They wait about 3.5 minutes. They would start drinking it straight from the still, or they would put it into small casks, one either side of their pony, and run up into the hills so they didn't have to pay the excise man. Much the same as we do today. So they would be drinking it from 0 days old, weeks old, months old. I doubt if it ever made it to a year. And then they would fill the cask again, second and third fills. And they would also fill just about any cask they could get their hands on. So if they had a cask from the Laird that was, a sherry cask, and then they filled it with spirit, you got the world's first sherry finish. Glenmorangie said they do the world's first port finish. I reckon there was a wee guy up the way. Don't let these two have any more. Hey! Christ! Taxi! Just, can I introduce Mum and Dad now? Only joking. So, they used to drink it 0 days old, a few days old, probably only ever made it to months old, okay? Glenmorangie said they did the first portwood finish. I'm sure someone up the west coast has found a port cask at some stage 300 years ago, filled it with spirit, and they had port finish. The only cask they were a bit reticent to fill was the salted herring cask. And there was a wonderful story that someone tried. And afterwards it didn't taste too good. So they took the cask end off and they burnt all the inside of the cask to get rid of the oils from the salted herring. And then refilled the cask. First charred casks made lovely whiskey. Now I don't know if that's true, but I like to think it is because it's just such a nice story. So, we move on. The next one coming up, because we've already proved to you that all whiskey really started at Geneva, but we didn't have Geneva in Scotland because we use peated spirit and peated malt barley. So, this in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, hold the front page, is a world first. You are the first people in the world, and normally people that do first are slightly more excited than you obviously are. Right? Because I was hoping this was going to be slightly more applause, clapping, fanfare. So, this is the world's first Scottish peated Geneva. So we've taken our peated spirit this time, passed it through juniper, and what you've got here is our interpretation of how all Scotch whisky started in Scotland. 300-400 years ago, up the west coast, we guys with pot stills in the hills making spirit, we like to think this is what they were making. This is what started this fantastic industry that we're in, that we love. Peated Geneva. Not even on the market. So you guys are tasting one of 2 bottles that I have with me. Thankfully no one's dropped the other one yet, Nicole. So you're going to get the smokiness, the peatiness, but you'll also get that juniper note coming through. Yeah? You smell of juniper coming through? So that really is the hybrid. So this is where Scotch meets gin. Nice? Yeah? Hands up for good. Everyone in the room, fantastic. Okay. Even the gin drinkers in the corner. See, this is where it all started. We're now embryonic gin, or great craft spirit in Scotland. This is where it all began. So, to just first order, Zach. Yeah, it's a world first, hand numbered by Zach. You know, they could be expensive commodities. So, what we're going to finish you with, just to square this whole circle on World Gin Day, is we're going to give you our interpretation now of where we've got where whiskey meets gin. We're now going to give you where gin meets whiskey. So the next spirit to come through the door will be Strathearn Oaked Highland. Now you'll hear several people talking just now about how we oak our gin and we lay it down in oak casks and let it rest. Now Zach works with gin every day and whiskey. It does very little work, doesn't need a rest. So we don't do it that way. We're very traditional at Strathearn, with just a twist of Willy Wonka. Why? Because we can. We are so small, we can choose to do what we want. There's 4 or 5 of us in the business. In fact, we're joined, I didn't introduce Celine, sorry. Celine is over from France. She's doing a 10-week internship with us from Remy Martin. So, yeah, exactly. So she's helped. She just wanted to get away from the football. You know. So what we're finishing with is gin. Happy World Gin Day, but it's gin with a twist. So instead of putting the gin into an oak barrel and leaving it for a number of months, we put the oak barrel in the gin. So we take the barrel apart and sink it into the gin and let it do its work. Literally. Yeah. And what you're going to get here, this is part of our distillery strength range that we've just released last week. The distillery strength range is our 4 core gins at distillery strength. And people ask us, what is distillery strength? What is distillery strength, Stuart? Distillery strength is what we decided to release it at. We don't have a navy. So navy strength was fairly pointless. So we tried it at 40%, 43%, 47%, 50%, 53%, 57%, and 60%. Lo and behold, it tasted better at 60%. We're distillers, what can I say? But actually, alcohol molecules carry a lot of flavour. So the higher the alcohol, sometimes you get a lot more flavour transfer. So we got a very flavoursome gin. But 60% is quite boring. So at Strathearn we're not boring. It just so happens that Tony, the owner, is 60 and a half years old. So we made it 60.5%. Next year it might be 61%. Hopefully we get to 62. Yeah. So this is cask strength gin with a difference. Designed for a Scottish summer's evening. Pissing down with rain. Log fire on, wet dog at your feet. You don't want a summery gin and tonic. You want almost a digestif. So this is where gin meets whiskey. You're going to sip on this. If anything, a twist of orange peel, a cube of ice. But it's a sipping gin. It's going to fill your mouth with a beautiful amount of alcohol. And then as it warms you up, you're going to get vanilla, 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 vanilla. Tweak of orange on the finish. But it's a delicious drinking gin. I get told off at the distillery for calling it the 24-hour gin. Because if you have it for brunch, say 9:30, with a shot of fresh orange in it, it is absolutely delicious. But drink responsibly. Sorry, that was the beginning of my speech. Just sort of come round. So guys, hopefully I've proved to you that all Scotch malt whisky comes from gin. We can celebrate World Gin Day with gin, and that's a little bit of history of Strathearn Distillery at the same time.
Sure, smile.
What? Thank you. Guys, it's been a pleasure.